This lesson is for critical task training for the Dalton Police Department. The terminal performance objective for this lesson is while employed with the City of Dalton Police Department, the employee will be able to identify the critical topics that are essential to safely and effectively perform their official duties. Our enabling objectives are to discuss the appropriate way to enter various types of evidence into the property and evidence section of the police department, discuss search and seizure and how it affects the employee on a daily basis, identify the proper way to restrain prisoners and how to care for them once they are in the officer's custody, identify the proper way to monitor subjects who are temporarily being detained, identify the correct way to handle a family violence situation involving an employee of the Dalton Police Department, discuss the appropriate way to handle a situation when off duty and what action, if any, should be taken, discuss the selection and hiring procedures of the Dalton Police Department, discuss how citizen complaints and internal investigations are handled within the Dalton Police Department, discuss the City of Dalton's sexual harassment policy, identify the procedures to be followed for a situation that requires a response related to a tactical situation, identify the appropriate way to conduct a roadblock as outlined in Dalton Police Department policy, and also to identify the lawful procedures for a seizure or forfeiture of property as outlined in Dalton PD policy and Georgia state law. The first topic we'll talk about is property and evidence. The property and evidence section of the police department, or of any police department, is probably one of the most important functions that a department has. Chain of custody on evidence is always questioned when it comes into court, so fortunately we have a very good property and evidence section here, and we take great measures and a lot of different measures in order to make sure that things are secured properly. One of the most important things that an officer can do is to make sure that all evidence is entered prior to them going off duty. Fill out a property record or receipt for all property that's being obtained. And then there's some items that you may come in contact with that require special handling. Some of these are listed below: firearms, flammables or explosives, perishable items or items that require refrigeration, and anything that may contain an infectious disease. On this page here, you'll see that there is the Property and Evidence Procedure Manual. I'll take you to that and let you see kind of what it looks like. If you've never seen this before, this is a very helpful tool in order to kind of answer some questions that you may have. They did a very good job of putting this together. So if you look down through here, you can see the general info for entering evidence, and some of the items that we talked about on the previous slide. You'll notice that they're in here as well. As we go down through here, anything that's going to the crime lab, let me back up. If you see some stuff in highlighted here in yellow, you can see that it is stuff that evidently in the past there's been an issue with, or it's things that people commonly make mistakes on. So one of the things you can see here is names on a submission form and actual evidence must match exactly. So if you're going to, as an example here, if you use John Wayne Smith on the submission form, then you must use John Wayne Smith on the evidence. You can't mix and match how you're listing that on the evidence form. As we scroll on down, videotapes, it gives you some detailed information on how to do that. And then entering guns into evidence. If a weapon is to be released immediately, you must make sure that it's accompanied by a criminal history of the suspect to when you turn that weapon in. So the history needs to be turned in with the paperwork and not placed inside the evidence bag. If the weapon is to be released at a later date, a current criminal history will have to be acquired at that time. So make sure that if the gun is loaded when you obtain it, make sure you make that weapon safe and get that turned into the property and evidence section in a safe manner. If for some reason you're unable to make the weapon safe or you're unfamiliar with the firearm, a couple different options: find someone that may be more familiar with the firearm than you are, or if nobody can make the gun safe or the weapon safe, make sure that there is a note left for the property and evidence custodian so they're not taken by surprise when that happens. The other item on that list, and we'll go back to it, the other item on that list was flammables or explosives. If you come in contact with anything that has to be entered into property and evidence that's flammable or explosive, we're obviously not going to keep those inside the building for safety reasons. So things like this, you'll have to get with the fire department to try to figure out a way that we could secure those. Most things that are explosives, we're going to have some type of specialized unit come up, either from the GBI or if it's military ordnance, maybe from EOD, to take care of that anyways. We're not going to store that item on site here. Perishable items or items that require refrigeration, those will have to be secured by the property and evidence custodian. One of those guys will come in and take care of that, and if it's after hours, they may have to you may have to call them in, but just get with your supervisor about that. And then anything that contains an infectious disease, please make sure you label that on the outside of the container, so that way no one accidentally comes in contact with that. So just write on the outside of the container that it may contain an infectious disease. The next topic we'll talk about is search and seizure. Probably one of the easiest ways to remember, kind of a refresher on search and seizure, is what we call the 234 rule. There's different variations of this out there, but this is the one that that's most common that you'll see. And basically, the 234 is an easy way to remember, or the 234 rule is an easy way to remember the different things we're talking about in search and seizure. First of all, the 2 discusses there's 2 types of legal authority. The first type of legal authority that you have as a peace officer is articulable reasonable suspicion, or ARS. And by definition, we all use this every day, but by definition, it is a set of facts and circumstances in which a reasonable and prudent peace officer suspects, based on his or her knowledge, training, and experience, that criminal activity is afoot. The next type of legal authority is probable cause, and we break probable cause down just a little bit into probable cause to seize or arrest, or probable cause to search. Probable cause to seize or arrest is a set of facts and circumstances in which a reasonable and prudent person, using all one's senses, to believe that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed by the person suspected. Probable cause to search is a set of facts and circumstances in which a reasonable and prudent person believes, based on reliable and credible information, that the person or items to be seized is at the location to describe. Now, something we know we can't use is mere suspicion. That is not acceptable as far as a seizure is concerned. So mere suspicion is not acceptable. The 2 types of legal authority that we have would be probable cause, whether that's to seize or to search, and then articulable reasonable suspicion as well. Make sure in your incident reports, and this is for just a good refresher here, make sure in the incident reports that you're explaining your legal authority. Describe in detail how your legal authority was developed. Some common things that may be used to develop legal authority could be your knowledge, training, experience, set of circumstances, the location, was it a high crime, low crime area, the date and time of the incident can also help when explaining your legal authority. The 3 in the 234 rule discusses the 3 types of police-citizen encounters. And this is something that gets a lot of officers around the country in trouble, because we end up stepping over one of these tiers, and we'll go from what would be a Tier 1 encounter or a consensual encounter, and all of a sudden we turn that into a Tier 2 and maybe even a Tier 3 depending on the circumstances. And a lot of times officers get confused on what their legal authority is. So what we have to understand is that unless there's no if you have no ARS or no probable cause, and it's just a verbal or consensual encounter, The person is free to leave at any time. It's merely an approach. It's not necessarily a stop. A Tier 1 requires no legal authority, and again, that person can leave at any time they want to. Now, if you have some reasonable suspicion that this person has committed a crime, depending on, again, the scenario that you can play out, then now we're talking about a brief stop or a Tier 2 encounter. And this would include a Terry stop or an investigative stop. You've not got quite the level needed for an arrest, which would be a Tier 3, but you do have a reason to detain this person and keep them on scene. Again, be very careful as you're going through this in your daily operation or daily duties from turning a Tier 1 into a Tier 2. And a lot of times officers around the country, you'll see it, they get their feelings hurt because they've asked somebody to do something, and the person that they're speaking with doesn't necessarily do it, so they automatically turn that Tier 1 into that Tier 2, like we talked about a minute ago. A Tier 3 is an arrest, and you must have probable cause to arrest, and we all know that. But again, turning a Tier 2 into a Tier 3 is also something that officers around the country do, and maybe they've not gotten quite to that point of having probable cause. So be very careful with this, and be very mindful of what you're doing in order to keep yourself protected, and also to do the right thing and to do your job properly. The 4 in the 234 rule discusses the 4 ways to legally enter a dwelling. Now, obviously, we know we can do this on a warrant. We can do it on a search warrant, arrest warrant, court order, as long as making sure that everything is described on the warrant and that we're at the right location that is addressed on the warrant. Exigent circumstances would be so an example of that would be to prevent injury or death of someone inside, to prevent the destruction of evidence, and to prevent the immediate escape of a wanted person. The last 2 would be valid consent. Now, this must be given by the owner or by someone with valid authority to give consent. Obviously, there's some case law out there that's been made around the country as far as who has authority and who does not have authority. If someone does not have permission to be there, or if you're asking a very, very young child for consent to search a residence, obviously the court's probably not going to view that very well when we're talking about someone that's able to give consent to search that residence. The consent can be either oral or written. The burden to prove that is on the officer. The last way to enter a dwelling would be by hot pursuit. And you must be pursuing for an arrestable offense. Is what the courts have said. The suspect's flight must be from an officer or from a crime scene. And also, the suspect must know that the police are in pursuit. Again, there's some case law around the country that's been made, and these are some of the factors that have been laid out from that case law. Alright, the next topic we'll talk about is care, custody, control, restraint of prisoners. This is a very hot topic around the country over the past year or so. We've seen some issues with this and seen this topic kind of come up a few times. What we've got to understand, and what we really want to hit on here, is that you are responsible as the officer for that prisoner's safety once they're in your custody, especially if they're handcuffed in the back of a patrol vehicle. The manner in which you drive, if they're seat belted in the car, all that falls back on you, and you are responsible for their safety. Obviously, a marked unit is the preferred transport vehicle, and we're only going to transport in an uncaged or unmarked vehicle with a supervisor's approval. Before you come on duty each day, please make sure you search your vehicle, search the back seat area prior to transporting a prisoner, and then also after a prisoner has been transported. This protects you, and it also protects the person that you're transporting. It would be kind of an injustice if the person that you were transporting, maybe you didn't check the seat, or the officer before you that had the car didn't check the seat prior to them being transported, and then the other person that got transported before them, maybe they left some contraband in the vehicle, and then the wrong person gets charged with that. So it's that's not a good situation for anybody. So make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do there when searching the back seat of the car. If you have a prisoner or a suspect in your custody, and when you're on your way to transporting that individual to the correctional facility, responding to calls is really not a good idea. There has to be some type of clear and grave risk to a third party or life-threatening situation in order for you to do that. So, and there has to be minimal risk to the prisoner. So you have to weigh that out. And is it a life-threatening situation that you must take care of? Do not grant any request from the arrestee to stop at a location unless approval is obtained from the supervisor. An exception to this sometimes would be if you're dealing with someone on a DUI and you've given David, given you or they've consented to the required state tests, maybe of their blood, for example, and once they've went ahead and consented to that test, they ask you to stop by an ATM to allow them to get some cash out. There are some case laws out there that if that's the only option, there are some case laws out there that said the officer must comply with that. Now, today, in the world we live in today, check cards and things like that are options for most people. So usually we can get that worked out with the hospital or the medical facility that we're dealing with. So just keep that in mind. Not stopping by someone's residence to pick something up before they go to jail. Again, that's not safe for you, and it can create all kind of issues. There are times when we have people that are temporarily in our custody. An example of that would be juveniles, and if you arrest a juvenile for an offense that would be a felony, then they have to be brought back to the police services center and fingerprinted. Those fingerprint cards are kept on file here, and another set of those cards are sent off. But if you're in custody processing a juvenile, they're going to be processed in either two of the interview rooms located upstairs at the police services center. And this will be when you're doing the photographs and those fingerprints. 2 officers should be present in the interview room, and then we have to make sure that contact is maintained with that individual, and that all weapons will be controlled. We won't put them in a position to where they have access to any weapons. As with all cases involving detainees, due care should be used at all times in order to prevent an escape attempt. And then again, at the bottom of this slide here, and then this comes straight from policy, but we have to receive initial training and annual training on the proper procedures for pertaining to processing of juveniles. Another example of this would be the mobile intox trailer for doing some type of detail. And so after being taken into custody for a DUI during a road check, the designated area to process offenders on scene is going to be the mobile intox trailer. The trailer is fitted with a duress alarm that sounds audibly, and then the following procedures should apply to that. Same thing as before, ensure that contact is maintained with the arrestee. Any personnel within the extended reach of the arrestee will maintain constant control of all weapons, and they're not going to be put in a position to where he or she has access to any weapons. We're going to try to prevent escape, and then, again, just like before, you're required to receive training on this on an annual basis. The last part of temporary detention or in custody processing that we have to deal with outside of the correctional facility is going to be if we're doing some type of intox testing here at the police services center. So after an individual is taken into custody for DUI and a breath test is to be conducted here at the center, if we for some reason have to do it at the police department rather than doing it in booking, then the area that we'll do that is in either of the 2 interview rooms, and both the interview rooms are fitted with duress alarms that sound audibly throughout the building. And the same procedures go for this as they do for dealing with juveniles or for doing a test in the intox trailer. So make sure they're kept weapons are kept out of their control. Do everything we can to prevent escape, and then again you'll receive training on this annually. The next section we'll talk about is family violence. We'll do a real quick refresher on family violence and the definitions of that, and then we'll talk about the second half of this. Family violence is defined as the occurrence of one of the following acts between past and present spouses, parents and children, step-parents, stepchildren, foster parents and foster children, or other persons living or formerly living in the same household. One would be any felony, or two would be the commission of offenses of battery, assault, criminal damage to property, unlawful restraint, or criminal trespass. So this is what falls under the family violence statute in Georgia law. One of the questions that we've got to answer is, what if the victim or aggressor is a Dalton Police Department employee? Unfortunately, this does happen sometimes throughout our area. Even in our city, sometimes it happens throughout the country. You'll see this to where the victim or aggressor is actually an employee of the department that may be investigating it. So if it's our agency, and our policy is pretty good about outlining this, the supervisor and a second officer is going to respond to that call. Now, we may not know immediately, but once we find out that an employee is involved in this, the supervisor will respond to the scene. We're going to provide no professional courtesy or special consideration or special treatment to the employee, whether they're the victim or the aggressor. We're going to investigate that just like we would if we were dealing with someone that was not an employee. Again, the only difference is a supervisor is going to respond to the scene. A brief refresher on family violence and some of the things that we need to remember and take into consideration is that when we're responding to a family violence incident, we need to stay alert and on guard at all times, especially if it's something involving another police officer. It could be someone that's in a crisis, whether it's from our agency or from another. We know that there's going to be weapons present if it's another law enforcement officer. Make sure you don't park in front of the residence. Don't stand in front of the door when knocking. Just the basic things that you learned in basic mandate that sometimes we forget about. One of the first things that you're going to do when you're on scene is try to restore order by gaining control of the situation, and then interview all parties separately. We're going to complete an incident report on all domestic violence calls if we can determine that it is a domestic violence call. And then if children under 17 are present, obtain their information for the report and forward that report over to DFACS. Some of the things that you may use for establishing probable cause to arrest: previous calls to that location, indication of drugs or alcohol abuse, damage or disarray of home furnishings, obvious signs of injury or abuse, the emotional state of the victim, statements of the parties involved, and of any witnesses there on scene. The policy, Dalton Police Department policy, again outlines our arrest procedures. When a felony's been committed and the suspect can be located, the officer will make an arrest. So, and you notice will is highlighted there or underlined and in bold on the screen. If a felony is committed and the suspect cannot be located, the officer shall apply for an arrest warrant. And we're only going to advise the victim to schedule a pretrial or warrant hearing with the magistrate court on cases where probable cause cannot be established. You want to advise the victim or witnesses about what to do if the suspect or suspect's companions or family threatens or otherwise intimidates him or her. Make sure they're notified to call back and speak with someone, file a report on that, make sure that they document all of those encounters, because that is obviously a pretty serious event that's going on, and it can be definitely can assist the district attorney's office in prosecuting this case. Provide information about what types of resources are available, from victim witness to maybe it is the crisis center, referral information for legal or social assistance, and support utilizing the victim rights notifications form. All right, the next topic we'll talk about is off-duty action, and this is something we're seeing a lot more of around the country, and trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing and make sure that we're prepared to deal with it if we're going to respond or we're going to act. Off-duty officers must demonstrate courteous professional behavior while in public. Even if we're not wearing the Dalton Police Department uniform, we still are representatives of this agency, and people are going to look at you different than they do anybody else. So our policy defines off-duty as not assigned or working a prescribed shift or duty, further in the process of conducting personal business, leisure activities, or working for another person or business other than the police department. Personally involved by policy is defined as an officer is deemed personally involved when the off-duty officer, a family member, or a friend becomes engaged in a dispute or incident involving a personal matter with the person being arrested or any other connected with the incident, or the officer is accepting money for law enforcement or security duties from other than this department. This does not apply to situations where the police officer is a victim of a crime. So one of the first questions that you have to ask yourself off duty is, am I even prepared to handle the situation? Many times people will act, or people will identify themselves as a law enforcement officer, and they're not even prepared. Do they have a weapon or any type of lethal, less lethal? Do they have their identification, credentials, and badge? There's been some situations throughout the country to where maybe an officer saved the day by taking down an active shooter, for example. And then there's a lot of confusion when the actual responding officers get on scene with who's supposed to have the gun and who doesn't have the gun. So you've got to be very careful. You don't want to end up in a situation to where you were a hero and you took care of the problem at hand and then get shot in the process by responding officers because there's some confusion. So you've got to use common sense and good judgment when acting off duty. And you also may carry approved off-duty weapons as authorized in the firearms policy. However, those weapons, if you're going to carry those weapons or carry a handgun, whatever the case may be, they may only be used in compliance with 16321, which is use of deadly force, or our use of force policy as well. So all that stuff still applies. All our policies apply. Georgia state law applies. 17420. So you still got to be held accountable under policy. So make sure that you're familiar with how that's outlined. Any kind of activity or action that's taken off duty. These are some of the things that are outlined that are listed as your responsibilities. Immediately report any suspected or observed criminal activities to on-duty authorities. Abide by all departmental policies and procedures when effecting an arrest or intervening in an altercation. Carry department credentials and badge at all reasonable times, and then take immediate enforcement actions only to safeguard life or to prevent escape of dangerous offenders. We're not going to enforce minor traffic infractions, things like that. It's best just to, if you're going to get involved in something like that, go ahead and call in to the dispatch center, have them send an on-duty officer to make a traffic stop and things like that. You don't want to be making traffic stops or whatever off duty and acting on just minor infractions. Some of the permitted off-duty arrest is something where you're not personally involved in the incident underlying the arrest. There's an immediate need for the prevention of a serious crime or apprehension of a felony or violent suspect. The crime requires a full custodial arrest and in possession of appropriate police identification and badge. And then lastly, there's no on-duty officers present or capable of responding in a reasonable period of time. So this is going to be a very emergency or exigent circumstance to where you're going to make an off-duty arrest there. So very seldom does this happen around here. It does happen some, but it's not all that common. Prohibited off-duty arrest when you're personally involved in the underlying incident, when engaged in off-duty employment not associated with the police department, and the officer's actions are only in the furtherance of the interest of the private employer. as enforcement of a minor traffic regulation, code, or administrative matter. We've already discussed that. And then when the officer has custody of minor children and is responsible for their safety and protection. That's not a good idea. That last slide there, or the last bullet point there, that's definitely not a good idea for the safety of your children or yourself there. The next topic we'll talk about is the selection and hiring process. This has changed a little bit over the past few years, but everything is pretty much still the same. Our process, I would say, since most people that are still employed here, hasn't changed that much over during the past. So post requirements are still the same, 18 years of age or older. We typically, if we hire anyone under the age of 21, it's normally when they're about 20 and a half, maybe a little bit older than that, and they'll turn 21 in the academy. So, but post requires you to be 18 years of age or older to be a peace officer. U.S. citizen, high school diploma, no felony convictions, possess good moral character, and that's determined by our background investigation. Our hiring process, again, like I said, it's not changed that much. The first thing we're doing now is the physical readiness assessment, and then once they complete that, they're completing the written exam, which also includes the psychological exam there, the oral board, the polygraph examination, background examination, the interview with the chief, a medical exam, and then Public Safety Commission acceptance. So the process is stayed pretty much the same, and we're still getting quite a bit of applicants coming through the process, and that we're trying to push through. A topic that no one really likes to hear about sometimes, but it is important that we understand it, is complaints or internal affairs, internal investigations, or professional standards unit, or however you want to refer to it. But in our policy, all citizen complaints pertaining to misconduct, policy violations, or violations of law will be documented and investigated. If you're approached, provide the citizen with information explaining the complaint process and provide them with a complaint form. If you don't have that, you can direct them down here to the Police Services Center, and they can pick up one here on site. Internal complaints, if possible, internal complaints should be reported to the employee's immediate supervisor, and if the supervisor is involved in the complaint, the employee may file that complaint with the appropriate division commander or with the chief of police. On general complaints or some type of inquiry or small complaint, the supervisor responsibility, he or she may try to resolve the complaint by exploration of departmental policies and procedures when applicable. Complaints that do not result in a formal complaint, we're going to classify those as inquiries. And then an administrative internal investigation is going to be required for anything that's criminal misconduct, unethical activity, negligence or neglect of duty resulting in bodily injury or death, abusive conduct by a supervisor directed toward a subordinate, or excessive or improper use of force. The division commander is going to forward the original complaint and all documents, evidence, and information relating to the investigation to the Professional Standards Unit, which is Support Services Division Commander, or his or her designee. And then the Professional Standards Unit is going to have the primary supervisory responsibility for all complaints. It reports directly to the chief of police on all complaints. They send a memo to the chief of police notifying him of the complaint. Contact the complainant to advise him or her that the matter is under investigation. Contact the employee subject to the complaint in writing that they are the subject of an administrative investigation or inquiry, and then complete the investigation within 20 calendar days unless there's an extension requested and granted by the chief, and then submit recommendations to the chief of police, who will ultimately make the final decision on the outcome. The employee that is subject to an investigation, let's talk about your rights or our rights as we go through this. Scope of questioning during the interview, depending on if it's a criminal or administrative violation. If it's criminal, then Miranda is going to apply. If is an administrative violation, then your Garrity rights are going to apply, and some of the things that's listed under the Garrity rights is down here below. The employee must answer all questions truthfully. You can be required to answer all questions specifically, narrowly, and directly related to the performance of their official duties. Refusal to comply with an order to answer such questions is a violation of departmental rules, which may subject the employee to further discipline, up to and including dismissal. Any required self-incriminatory admission made during the interview may only be used in a subsequent administrative proceeding and should not be used against the employee in a subsequent criminal proceeding. So the criminal investigation will be conducted prior to an administrative investigation there. And again, whether it's criminal or administrative will determine if Miranda or Garrity rights apply and which one applies to that. The last correction, the next topic we'll talk about is the City of Dalton sexual harassment or sexual discrimination policy. Sexual harassment is defined as unwelcome words or behaviors such as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Harassment and discrimination of others equals serious employee misconduct, and both men and women are protected from sexual harassment. Our complaint procedures. If you have a complaint or need to file some type of complaint on this, tell the person first of all that his or her actions are unwelcome and offensive. Document all incidents of unlawful harassment to assist with the investigation, and then report the incident as soon as possible. You can report it to an immediate supervisor unless the supervisor is the one involved. You can report it to a division commander, chief of police, City of Dalton Human Resources Director, or the city administrator. Alright, the next topic we'll talk about is special operations. There's a few different special operations topics in here that we'll discuss. The first one we're going to talk about is the SWAT or special weapons and tactics. Any situation that requires a SWAT team. Our first responding officer's responsibility is going to be to notify dispatch, contain the scene, assist injured persons, evacuate injured persons and bystanders, and detain witnesses. We do not have a tactical team or SWAT team here at the Dalton Police Department. So if we need one or a hostage negotiator hostage team, we're going to notify the Georgia State Patrol. They should be contacted by the incident commander that's in charge there at the scene. So we're going to maintain a secure perimeter until GSP SWAT team arrives and can work with the division commander in order to try to resolve this situation peacefully. The next special operations topic we'll talk about is roadblocks. You see there on the screen that roadblock is defined as a stationary location of police vehicles and officers intended for the specific purpose of limiting the escape opportunities for suspects who present a potential grave danger to the public if allowed to escape. In addition, carefully designed roadblocks may be established to end police pursuits of suspects known to be involved in violent felonies. I've got some other definition listed there, the definition of the watch commander and all. We've got a couple different ways that we can use roadblocks, and we'll discuss those as we go along. First one we'll talk about is use of roadblocks for the apprehension of criminals. Some of the factors we need to consider is sufficient information and description of the wanted persons and vehicles, the elapsed time between the crime and its discovery. Remember, the longer it takes to evaluate the seriousness of the crime and assemble information, the less effective the roadblock is going to be. So, and roadblocks have been effective throughout the country on incidents that we've had, but if they're not put into place in a fairly reasonable amount of time, like it says here, you limit the effectiveness of that. The authority and site selection. The watch commander is going to have the authority to implement a roadblock to apprehend suspects. The site selected should provide for safety but also surprise. Intersections permit more areas of escape and they complicate traffic control. So residential areas create a great danger to the public. So a lot of things to weigh out here when you're looking at putting a roadblock into place. We can try to make use of natural obstructions and look for terrain features that offer cover and protection. And then the location should permit observation of vehicles turning around before reaching the roadblock. When we're manning the roadblock, officers should be in uniform to be easily identified. Officers should be fully informed about the nature and seriousness of the crime, description of the vehicles, wanted persons, etc. If there's any weapons involved, and if possible, any previous record the person may have. Courtesy is extremely important since non-involved persons will be inconvenienced. Probably a lot of questions that will be asked to the officer here. So just making sure that you're courteous and patient with people in this can definitely help go a long way. The patrol vehicle should be positioned at 45-degree angle to the flow of traffic. And then, if possible, a stop sign should be placed at the roadblock point. Flares, lights, properly positioned vehicles make the roadblock safer to the public and also to the officers on scene, especially if that's at night. So try to stay off the road and out of oncoming headlights. And then once a car is stopped, do not walk in front of the stopped vehicles for your safety. Investigate all cars, even those known. Person could be hiding there, or the driver of the vehicle may be, have been carjacked or whatever. So try to determine which side of the road to seek cover if that's required. And then do not remain inside any vehicles positioned in the roadway blocking traffic for your safety again. If we have a pursuit that we're having to use a roadblock for, officers should be mindful of the fact that barricading a roadway must be considered as a use of force likely to result in death or serious injury. So the use of a roadblock must be directly related to the seriousness of the crime for which the suspect is being pursued. Roadblocks are only going to be utilized as a last resort when the violator being pursued presents a significant threat to the officers and or citizens and is proven to have a total disregard for the lives and safety of the public. Again, this will be a last resort type of situation. The following factors should be considered before establishing a roadblock. 1, the safety of officers, the risk of physical injury to the occupants of the pursued vehicle, and also to the protection of citizens and their property. Just like on the other, when we talked about roadblocks, if we're talking about a pursuit here, the watch commander is going to have the authority to implement a roadblock in in-vehicle pursuits. Try to establish that in a well-lit and or visible area of the roadway, and shall not be positioned in a curve or on a hill crest so that it cannot be easily seen by the suspect. This would be referred to as a dead man's roadblock per se. The roadblock must be clearly visible from a sufficient distance to allow the suspect the opportunity to safely stop. And again, this is coming out of case law from incidents that have taken place in the past. Every roadblock must offer the suspect an alternative or an alternate path of travel or exit around the barricade. Yet again, going back to can't do a dead man's roadblock to where you completely block the road. Gives them no other option but to crash. When setting up a roadblock, take measures to protect and warn other motorists. Whenever possible, a minimum of 3 units should be used, 2 units to block the lanes of travel and 1 unit to warn direct traffic approaching from the opposite direction. Once the decision has been made, dispatch will announce on the radio frequencies the location of the roadblock and circumstances surrounding it. The dispatch will also ensure that the pursuing officers acknowledge the location of the roadblock, again for maximum safety. Only marked police vehicles are going to be used in a roadblock. All emergency equipment is supposed to be turned on or shall be turned on. However, no headlights or spotlights will be pointed at oncoming traffic, again for safety purposes and not to blind the driver of that vehicle. No civilian vehicles will be used in any roadblock, and officers will not remain inside any vehicle position in the roadway blocking traffic, but you should seek protection behind available natural and or man-made barriers. Some different things that we may use, which would be authorized forcible stopping techniques, and this is going to be if the watch commander approves this. Intervention tactics, stopping techniques shall only be utilized by officers trained in their use and only after authorization from the watch commander. Couple different things we'll discuss here. Low speed channeling, that is defined as directing vehicular traffic into a progressively narrowing passageway or lane location on the roadway. In order to employ this technique, officers must ensure that each side of the suspect's vehicle is covered. A minimum of 2 vehicles should always be used for this technique. This tactic should only be used at low speeds and only after being approved by the watch commander. And you have to exercise extra caution once the suspect's vehicle stops due to the potential for crossfire. And so if you look at this screen here, I know it's kind of hard to picture this in your mind maybe, but the first one over here on option 1, you got the suspect vehicle, and then you've got patrol car 1 and 2. And so this would be a fixed object, such as maybe a guardrail on the interstate or on the roadway. Maybe it's a median like on West Walnut Avenue. So you've got the suspect traveling in this direction here. And then basically all you're doing is channeling that vehicle into a narrowing lane in order to get them to stop. Okay. Option 2 would be the suspect in the middle, and you've got an officer on all 4 sides, basically slowing that vehicle down in order to get it stopped. So the goal is to direct the vehicle into a progressively narrowing passageway or lane location on the roadway, and then each side of the suspect's vehicle may be covered. Now you'll see on option 1, the rear of the vehicle is not covered. So technically this would work better with 3 officers, but you need at least a minimum of 2 in order to conduct this effectively. The watch commander may authorize the use of these techniques, which will be ramming, bumping, intentional contact, but only if deadly force is otherwise justified. Alright, so the last part of the special operations is asset forfeiture, and this is something that we've not talked about a whole lot in the past, but it is an important topic, a very high liability topic as well. So it is the policy of the Dalton Police Department to utilize applicable state and federal statutes to accomplish the goals of disrupting criminal conduct by the lawful seizure and forfeiture of assets and proceeds used unlawfully or obtained through various criminal acts. As we go down through here, you can see the code section. If you want to look this up, it's OCGA 161349 that discusses this, and it's a pretty lengthy code section, but I would recommend kind of becoming familiar with this and understanding that where it talks about special emphasis on violations of the Georgia Controlled Substances Act. If you have any questions on asset forfeiture, some of the folks in CID, especially the operations supervisor or the drug unit supervisor, has a lot more information on this and can kind of guide you in the right direction if you're confused on some of this. But the Dalton Police Department's intent by participating in asset forfeiture is, first of all, to provide additional tools to law enforcement officers to hamper the operation of drug violators, make it more difficult to use illegal proceeds to continue a criminal enterprise if the leader is incarcerated, and also to remove the financial incentive to participate or invest in the drug trade. Anything with value or any interest in anything of value, including real property and any fixtures thereon, any tangible, intangible personal property, currency, instrument, securities. These are some of the things that can be the types of property that we can seize. And if you look at this this slide here, it talks about the statutory basis for seizure. Again, this is outlined in Dalton Police Department Policy 7.23. Again, if you've not read this in a while, I would highly recommend going in and looking at this. So I won't read this word for word here, but any officer of the Dalton Police Department may seize property for forfeiture if the agency determines there is probable cause to believe that the property falls within any of the following categories. Okay, so we talked about anything in 161349, which there's a large or long list of that. All property located in this state which was directly or indirectly used or intended for use in any manner to facilitate a violation of any of the code sections listed in 7.23. Again, that's in the very end of 7.23 has a list of those. Please go back and review that. And then any weapons possessed, used, or available for use in any manner to facilitate a violation of the code section listed in the same appendix there in 7.23. Alright, so you see some other things listed out here: interest, security, claim, or property, contractual right of any kind, affording a source of influence over any enterprise that a person has established, operated, controlled, conducted, or participated in the conduct of in violation of code sections listed in Appendix A of the policy. And so if you look, basically anything that's listed in Appendix A in 7.23 and also 161349 will give you some additional information and much more detail on this. Basically, when we're looking at this, most common seizures or items that are commonly seized by patrol officers or even detectives, first of all, money. The main thing to remember on this is that in order to seize money that's related to criminal activity, it has to be directly related to criminal activity, but has to be an amount over $500. Okay, and then vehicles are also items that are commonly seized, and they must be directly related to criminal activity. And for additional information on this, please refer to 161349 and also our policy 7.23. If there is any questions about which items may or may not be seized, please contact your supervisor or the Asset Forfeiture Review Coordinator, and currently that is Sergeant Steve Zahn, NCID. Alright, so in this lesson we've talked about many different things. We've talked about the ways to enter various types of evidence into P&E. We've discussed search and seizure, how it affects you on a daily basis. We've talked about ways to restrain prisoners and how to care for them once they're in your custody. We've talked about monitoring subjects who are temporarily being detained, identified the correct way to handle a family violence situation involving an employee of the Dalton Police Department, discussed the appropriate way to handle a situation when off duty and what action, if any, should be taken, discussed the selection and hiring process of the Dalton Police Department, discussed how citizen complaints and internal investigations are handled within the police department. We've discussed the City of Dalton sexual harassment policy, identified the procedures to be followed for a situation that requires a response related to a tactical situation. We talked about how to conduct a roadblock as outlined in DPD policy. And finally, we identified the lawful procedures for the seizure or forfeiture of property. As always, if you have any questions about any of the topics we've discussed, please send me an email. Give me a phone call. I'm always available to answer questions as long as I'm in the office. And thanks for listening.